from the cannons. When the smoke clears, we're still standing. Yes, we stand our ground.
You're listening to Everlasting Veteran.
When the smoke clears.
Welcome, everybody, to Everlasting Veteran. I am your host, Ryan Landry, also known as Wind Talker. Today, we have an amazing guest, Sandy Wall, who is a retired master peace officer, 28-year veteran with Houston Police Department. He worked in patrol, narcotics, and he served 22 years in HPD's SWAT detail. He also served as a team leader for more than 12 years. After law enforcement, he worked with Safariland Group as a director of training for 15 years, and he's co-authored Training the SWAT Trainer. He also authored a novel, The Long Road Home, and he's here to talk about his books, his experience, and hopefully give you some insight into being a police officer, operator, and his experiences throughout his career and what he's doing now. Sandy, welcome to Everlasting Veteran. Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
So you have many years experience in policing, in high-level SWAT training, training yourself. What are some of the highlights loved about the career? Some of the ones that most won't talk about. What are some of those highlights that you can remember over your time?
Well, when I joined the police department, I really just thought I'd be a patrol officer, and nothing wrong with that. I'd have been happy there. In fact, the day-to-day activity of being a police officer was always challenging for me because obviously being in a big city like Houston, every day you went to work, you never knew what was going to happen. And that's the part of the job that I like the most. But after a while, I'm one of those guys that always likes challenging myself, and so I sought out the narcotics division and worked that for a while, and then I always liked being in shape and always looking for another challenge, and then got on SWAT and then eventually attempted and finally made a team leader position. But it was always the challenge. It was always the thing that never knowing what was going to happen. It was never just a dull day at work. I mean, we had dull days. I'm not going to say that, but at a moment's notice, everything could change. And then, it's kind of a cliche is, we save lives, but I truly like to talk about the cases where we went to extreme measures not to have to use deadly force, as opposed to those cases where, unfortunately we did have to use deadly force. And there were many of both. But the ones I'm most proud of is where we did something that maybe, obviously, your normal citizen, but even your average patrol officer out there did not have the equipment or the training to do. And we took it to the next level and saved someone's life, even if he was a bad guy. Because those are the ones I'm most proud of. And obviously saving hostages and my fellow police officer.
Right. Yeah, in those high stress situations, a lot of times, there's rule books that are planned out. You have your training as well, but at the same time, we all know that situations change, dynamics change within the incident itself, and you have to adapt and overcome on the fly. What are some of the challenges after leaving policing? Now more of a trainer aspect, and still working kind of side by side with law enforcement. Your transition out, has there been some difficulties? Obviously a long career. Do you still want to go back? Do you want to kind of give it up completely, or you want to just kind of toe that rope where 1 foot in, 1 foot out, train, but give my experience back?
Well, for the last 22 years of my career, I was constantly on call. In Houston, we were on call 24/7, unless you were in like what they call the outbook, which they would only allow so many entry team guys and so many snipers. So if you went and looked and the book was full, which was quite often, especially around vacation time or deer hunt season or whatever, you couldn't get out. And so a large portion of my policing career for the last 22 years, I was constantly on call. And I always said when I pulled in my driveway after finally retiring and turning in my badge and everything, and I had that pager, and I literally wanted to drive over the Ship Channel Bridge and chunk that thing in the water. And the most pleasing part of it was when I parked my car that last day, I didn't have to think about, okay, let me turn it around and back it in and make sure nobody can block me in, because in a moment's notice, I'm going to have to get in this car sometime tonight and leave out. I wasn't leaving, going anywhere. And that was the most satisfying feeling, to know that unless I want to, I'm staying here tonight. And so sometimes it's the little things. And as far as my transition, I actually was fortunate in that I did not leave the profession. I just went to another aspects of the profession, being the training element. So I was still rubbing elbows with guys that were doing the job, and I was still hearing the stories and kind of living vicariously through that. And the only time I really missed the Houston SWAT team is when I would watch the news and see the guys are out there, and I'm looking to see who I recognize. And then the next day I'm on the phone, hey guys, what happened last night? Tell me all about it, And so it was the excitement of the call out that I missed. But as far as the day to day stuff, not so much.
Yeah, yeah, right. Now you have many accolades and achievements throughout your career, and still now as a trainer. You have a couple books, one co-authored, and you have a novel. Kind of dive into the training the SWAT trainer. What is that about, and what would you like people to kind of get out of it if they do pick it up?
Well, uh, we all change. Tactics change. State of the art equipment changes. And I remember looking at videos of what we were doing back in the 80s and 90s, and thinking, at the time, I remember thinking, we were high speed, man. This is really cool. We are state of the art. And then 20 years later, I'm looking at it thinking, oh my God, what were we thinking? So that's been a big part of the evolution of my career, is always having an open mind and not saying, well, what we're doing is good. And because you don't know what you don't know until you're exposed to something else, and have an open mind to accept it and really work on it. And I never really thought I could write a book. And a professor from the Texas State University, a retired Detroit police officer, he was on the SWAT team. His name is Tom Majerus. And he said, man, we need to write a book. We need to share our experiences and our training techniques. And I can do all the philosophical stuff, the case history stuff, but I need somebody with your experience to help me with the nuts and bolts and the tactical part of it. And I told Tom, I can't write a book. I can barely read. And he said, no, I'll do the heavy lifting on it. And so we did. It took us about 6 months to a year, I would say. I'd submit things to him. And of course, looking back on it, when I read it again, I go, God, I wish I would have said that. Or what should I have said it differently? Or now I would say something a little different. But anyway, we finished it, and it did really well. It wasn't for money. We donated all the money to the Les Early Scholarship at the Texas Tactical Police Officers Association. But it gave me the confidence that, you know what, maybe I could write a book. I know I'd need help, but I'm not really a writer. But yeah, it's not something out of the possibilities.
Awesome. Now you also have the long road home, and just the title itself. I think a lot of police officers, military personnel, or anybody in a profession that deals with a lot of high stress situations. And I haven't read it yet, but just the title alone, The Long Road Home, there's a certain connection just with that title. Now, kind of go into what that book's about, what you want readers to be able to get from that. And am I even close? Is the title what I think it is, The Long Road Home, and the journey of through a career like you had?
Yeah, you are very close, and that's kind of how I got it. Um, first off, all my career, we develop stories. Every cop's got stories. We have the job that's a front row seat to the greatest show on earth. And all I did was started kind of keeping mine. And the way I kept them is I kept telling them. And my wife was a career teacher, and we'd have outings with her teacher friends, or I'd go home and talk to my old buddies. And that's the first thing I wanted. Hey, tell us another one of those stories. And so I'd tell it, and or tell several of them. And the ending was, hey man, you ought to write a book. And I was like, I can't write a book. But so anyway, toward the end of my career, I looked at my wife and I said, I'm going to have to stay busy, or I'm going to turn into an alcoholic, because I'd had several of my buddies that had turned to alcoholics because they didn't do anything. They just sat on their porch and, come 3 or 4 o'clock, they'd mix them a drink. And next thing you know, come 2 o'clock, they're mixing them a drink. And next thing at noon, they're mixing them a drink. And then pretty soon, they're hooked. So I didn't want to go there, and I wanted to stay really, really busy. And now that I wasn't training for Safari Land or Defense Technology, and now that I was a law enforcement officer, and she said, well, why don't you write that book that people always said you ought to write? And you already written one. And I said, wow, I'd have to have a lot of help. And she said, I'd help you. Of course, she's 23-year high school level teacher. She's used to grading papers and not or essays and those sorts of things. So I said, maybe I will. So I'd get up in the mornings real early. I'm an early guy. I get up sometimes 3, 4 o'clock, and I'm staggering around the house drinking coffee and watching the news. And I'm gonna go in and write one of those stories. So I just sit down and type it. And then when my wife would finally wake up, I'd say, hey, I wrote a story. And I'd hand it to her, and she'd look at it and she'd, oh my God. I'm like, what? I'm thinking it's pretty good. And she's like, oh, no, no, no. She'd get out a red ink pen and she'd start ripping that thing up. And this is in incomplete sentence. This is not grammatically correct. There's several misspelled things. Oh my God. And she'd hand it back to me. And I'd be so defeated and embarrassed. And I'd go back to my office and I'd sulk for a little while and I'd think, yeah, I'm going to rewrite it. So I'd take all her corrections and I'd type it out and rewrite it. And then, next day I'd hand it to her. Okay, how about that? And she'd look at it and she'd still rip it up a little bit, but not as bad. She said, well, that's better. And so she'd hand it to me again. And this process went on sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And then finally she'd give me a little smiley face. And I was like a kid in the 3rd grade. I was like, oh my God, that's great. So I put it in a little folder on my computer. And then, I'd write another story. And this went on for 3 years, just writing stories. And I started out with academy stories, those things that happened to all of us in the academy. And then, I had to go to the jail and work for 6 months. And those things that happened in the jail, and then narcotics. And then finally, I got around to my SWAT career, writing all of those. And then I finished them. And I'm like, well, I didn't write all my stories, but I got the best ones in there, I thought. And I thought, now I got to link this somehow, so that I just didn't want vignette stories. I need to add something that links them. So I came up with a plot, and that's the only fictional thing in there is the plot that links all of these stories. And there's a bad guy in there. You meet him right at the beginning of the book, and he's a law enforcement officer as well, and he interacts with the main character through the entire book. And at the very end, there's a big gotcha. And once again, that's something that I had to come up with creatively. So that's really the only talent, if you want to call it, that was involved in doing the book. Everything else was just telling the story. I was there, or I was, in the next room, and I know what happened, and I wrote the story. And so I'm thinking, do I have anything here that anybody need want to read? So I had a buddy of mine who'd written a book. It's called The Cop Who Wouldn't Quit. His name was Johnny Bonds, real famous homicide detective. And I stay friends with him. So I sent the manuscript to him, and I had to wait 2 weeks. And that was the longest 2 weeks of my life, because that's how long it took for him to read it. And then he wrote me and he said, oh my God, this is great. Saying this is the best piece of work that anybody's ever handed me that's a cop. And I said, you're kidding me. He said, no. He said, I know a publisher. I need to send this to them. And I said, please do. Next thing you know, I'll get the publisher calling me, and they're like, we love this book. Will you let us publish it? I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, let's do it. So that's kind of how all that came to be.
Nice. Now, you do have some very outstanding awards and accolades, some of them which include the Top Cop Award and inducted into the state of Texas's Monadnock Instructors Hall of Fame in 2018. Awards are great, but what do they mean to you?
Well, the Police Officer of the Year award is something that an organization in Houston gives out every year, and they're very philanthropic, and that's quite the honor. And I'll just tell you right now, I got it for saving a veteran that was going to commit suicide. He was going to jump off the bridge, and I happened to be able to come up with a plan to sneak up behind him and grab him and pull him in. Of course, my buddies, we all jumped, bum rushed him then. And that's what I got the award for. But I'll tell you, any one of my other guys would have come up with that plan and would have executed that just as well. I just happened to be the one. And that's the way it is a lot of time. We call cops heroes. And don't get me wrong, cops are brave. cops should be held on the pedestal. I agree that, but we all know what we're signing up for, and we're all trained to do the job. We're equipped to do the job, and we go out there. And then when this situation unfolds, whatever it might be, hopefully you step up and do exactly what people expect you to do. Sometimes we go above and beyond, but a lot of times that's just a hero is a term that's just thrown around. But it was super nice to be awarded that. But I'll just say, as you'll hear in my book, a lot of times I say I just got lucky. The only reason I didn't end up, dead is because I just got lucky. Because a lot of times I could have been killed very, very easily, and it just worked out for me. As far as the Monadnock Hall of Fame, that was quite an honor. I don't think I deserved that. I ran that training program, but I wasn't one of the instructors, and those guys were, and they were the ones with the real talent. I, but I was retiring, and they knew it, and they wanted to give me that honor, and believe me, it's something I'm very, very proud of. As far as the SWAT Cop of Texas, that was a competition, and I had competed several times as a team with the Houston SWAT team, and we would go and compete against other SWAT teams all over the state. But they always had this individual thing called Super SWAT, and I never competed in that because it looked like the competition from hell. They put you through everything from obstacle courses to rappelling to handgun shooting, tactical rifle shooting, sniper rifle shooting. They kind of comprise or combine all of the things that are involved in being a SWAT officer and put it into one event. And I had never wanted to do that, but my captain wouldn't let our team go that year. And I was still going to represent my team, but I couldn't compete as a team. And I thought, well, I'll at least do something. So I'm going to enter this Super SWAT competition. And I talked another buddy of mine into entering it as well. And once again, I got to give the credit to him because I would have never trained as hard as he made me train. But he was an animal, and he pushed me and pushed me and pushed me. And I'll be damned, I went up there and I won it. And then I said, okay, guys, I can never, ever compete in this again because the best I could do is tie myself. I'll never win this. I mean, I could never do anything but equal my achievement before. More than likely, I won't win again, and I'll go down. So I only competed in it once, thank God. Now, but if it wasn't for my buddy pushing me, I would have never gotten to that level. And God, did he push me? I thought I was going to die. But that was a one-shot deal. A lot of luck involved, and it's right up here on my desk, and I'm very proud of it. So once again, a lot of luck involved in a lot of things I did, but I'll take it.
Nice. Now, what's your role now with working with police departments and training and everything else? What do you do now to kind of keep your foot, halfway in the door?
Well, obviously, I retired from the Houston Police Department in 2004. Went to work for Safariland, and I worked that till 2020, about 2020. And I just told them then, I said, the Sparland guys, I said, listen, I'm dialing it back. I would really rather spend my time fishing on the coast. But if you need somebody, I'm your break glass in case of emergency kind of guy. And I'll be damned, they said breaking the glass every once in a while. But I don't call them; they call me. I still train for the Texas Tactical Police Officer Association. Once again, I don't call them; they call me. And so I have dialed it way, way back. I maybe will teach 3 or 4 less lethal or tactical classes a year, and a few other conferences or something, a lecture or something. But I've dialed it way, way back. But just to keep your hands in the pie and be around those guys and see how much has changed. I mean, I can remember recently walking up to one of our Houston officers and saying, "What's that on your belt?" And he said, "Well, this little gadget right here, if you put somebody's finger in it, it'll read their fingerprint. It's Bluetooth to the car, and then it'll transmit it downtown, and they'll check him for records. So if he's got a record, I can know it in just a couple of minutes." And I looked at it, oh my God, how much technology has changed. Thank God, thank goodness. But we never had those kinds of things. That's just one example. As I still work with these guys, trying to teach them what I screwed up on. Please don't do it like this, because this did not work out well. Learn from me. But to see how the equipment and things that they have to work with, but the threat has changed. The threat has changed so much. I mean, with active shooter, we had active shooters back in my day, but not at the level they have them now. And then the terrorist events and just on and on and on. It's just, thank God we got technology to help these boys and girls out there, because they need everything we can get.
Yeah. What do you have any advice for, new police officers coming up? I've been in law enforcement for 10 years. So obviously there's 10 more to go, and it's a continuing, evolving profession constantly with laws changing and everything else. But any new officers or any military members, a lot of military members come out and they go into law enforcement, that sense of service. What advice do you have for anybody going into law enforcement?
Well, first off, work on your training. The training will help you. A lot of people think, well, I don't really need that, because if it got that bad, I'd step up. I'd go there. You won't. And there's an old saying, we will not rise to the occasion. We will default to our level of training. And I truly believe that. When the heart is pounding 180 beats per minute, and cognitive skills are gone, and fine motor skills are gone, and you're back to fight or flight and gross motor skills. And that's where, if you have that training dialed in and you have it on a repeated basis, and it's fairly frequent, because this is a perishable skill. I don't care how good you are. If you haven't done it lately, you're never going to be as good as you once were. And I understand that, and I can kind of I guess I'm at that level now too. I understand my capabilities, but that would be the first thing. Train every chance you get. Go to every school you can go to, and I don't care if it's like, this guy, I know his stuff. There's probably one thing that he can instill upon you in that class, that if you take that one thing and like, I like that, stick it in your little bag of tricks, it's worth the class, right? So that would be the first thing. Secondly, is write those stories down. Don't be like me and dedicate them to memory. Write them down, because one day you're going to have a hell of a book. I guarantee it. Every cop out there has them. And then I would just encourage them, when you're out there on the street, uh, pick your battles, I guess I should say. If, too many times we've seen patrol officers go in and force a confrontation when they probably didn't have to. And then we've also seen times, like in down recently in South Texas, where they didn't force the confrontation and they should have. So it's a fine line, and but don't risk your life if it's not necessary. But if it is necessary, that's what you swore an oath. That's what you have been equipped with and trained to do, and you need to go do the job. And you need to step up and do it now. And don't hesitate, because every second, every gunshot represents another life being taken. So pick your battles, but be smart about it.
Excellent. Now, what do you have for veterans out there and police officers dealing with veterans in crisis? Obviously, there's people that are in crisis all the time, um, but veterans specific. And you've gone to veterans in crisis. Do you think there's things that police departments can do better in dealing with the veteran community, and also the community relations of helping the veteran a little bit more past just the call?
Well, absolutely. We can always improve. And I'm probably not the one to ask of what the law enforcement is not doing now. That would probably be at another level. But I will tell you that there's a lot of veterans out there with skill sets above and beyond what law enforcement has. And, whenever we were rolling up to a SWAT scene and we're trying to find out about this guy, the minute they said he's a military veteran, automatically things get stepped up to another level, because he could be very skilled in a lot of things that could hurt all of us. And, heaven forbid you go up against a guy that's a Navy SEAL, Delta Force, Marine Recon, the list goes on and on. But those guys have skills that if used against us, would be a bad day at Black Rock. So that would be the first thing, is identifying what those people are capable of. Heaven forbid you have to go up against them. But in terms of helping them, one of my stories in my book, we had a military veteran that wanted to commit suicide. He went into a sporting goods store there in Houston, and he asked to see a rifle, and the guy handed him a rifle. He's checking it out, and he said, "Could I see what the ammunition you have there, that box there?" And the guy set it on the counter. And that was kind of not a fatal mistake, but it was a mistake on his part, because he reaches and grabs the box, grabs a couple rounds, loads a rifle, looks at the salesman and says, "I'm going to die today, and unless you want to die with me, you need to leave." And of course, he gets out of there. And thank goodness the veteran, oh, I lost you for a second. Thank goodness the veteran didn't want to hurt anybody else. But then he kind of just collapses down there, and I think he was trying to get the courage to do this. And of course, patrol gets there. They realize the guy's inside. Everyone else had gotten out. It was just him, and he's threatening suicide. And so we get in there, and me and a teammate were able to get up close enough to get a taser shot on him without having to kill him. And that was a very rewarding story in my book that I always bragged about, is that we were able to use equipment and skill sets to end a confrontation safely without having to use deadly force. But we don't. I was a draft dodger. I went fed out of high school, went into college, out of college, straight into the military. So I don't understand what those guys are dealing with. I think I do. I think I know a little bit of it, but some of the things that they have done and seen, and I don't know that there's an exit ramp as much as there should be in the military. But I've had a lot of buddies of mine come over and into the police department that I've rode with and worked with, and heard their stories, and I've seen them experience or the emotion and the sometimes regret, sometimes frustration. We have that in law enforcement, but uh, there's got to be more training. Not only an escalation, but de-escalation. And there's a term that was going around for a long time called verbal judo. I don't know if they're still using that or not, if it's called something else, but it's just being able to use words to try to de-escalate a situation, and hopefully not say the wrong thing, because you could go off on a tangent, and the next thing you know, you've done the wrong thing and you've escalated the situation. So that kind of training would be invaluable, I would think, in that situation. But once again, it's a perishable skill. If you haven't done it on a frequent, regular basis, it's probably not going to be there for you. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's probably the best I can come up with right now.
Yeah, and it goes to the testament that law enforcement and veterans, we go through high stress situations, whether it's a singular event, and your perception of how you handled the incident. Sometimes you end up Monday morning quarterbacking it yourself, and you go down that road of, I should have done this, I should have done that, and then those emotions of regret, remorse, come into play. And you need to be able to find an outlet, I think, where you can talk to somebody, whether it's a police officer, a family member, another veteran, and I developed this podcast, The Message, for people to be able to hear other stories, veteran police officers, and blending the world together, where police officers, we respond to veterans in crisis. We're the first ones there, and being a veteran myself, a lot of times, I just responded to one a few nights ago, and a lot of times people don't ask those questions. I mean, we knew the person was military because they told us, but a lot of times we don't ask, and asking and finding more out about the person's backstory, I think, can help us help them more, because then we can understand a little bit. We're not going to know exactly what they're feeling, what their emotions are, but we can understand a little bit and have empathy, just that much more, to be able to help them through the situation in which they're in. And I think police officers, need to be commended just as much as veterans, because we deal with those high stress situations as well. It may not be a year-long separation from your family. You're going home most of the time after your 8 hours or 16-hour shift. But we do deal with those, like I said, high stressful situations, singular events, which is the adrenaline pump and dump. And then you get home and you got to try to turn that switch off. And it's very difficult sometimes, So what advice would you have for police officers dealing with that adrenaline pump and dump, doing the high stress? Then you get home and you got to quickly unwind to possibly go to sleep and go back and do it all over again.
Well, you don't want to take that stuff home if you can't go. Luckily, I had a wife that was a great listener, and sometimes when we were alone and the kids weren't around, she'd sense that something was bothering me, and we'd have that discussion. But I tried not to bring many things home. In fact, some of these stories that I wrote in the book, my wife turned to me, she said, "I didn't realize that happened, or I didn't realize that was bothering you like that." And I said, "Well, I just didn't want to share it." But um, you mentioned it a lot, having that empathy. But I remember in the academy, one of my instructors said, "Don't just have police officer friends. Have friends that are out there in the community, people that are of another lifestyle, or another genre." With his message was, if we only have cop friends, then we tend to circle the wagons and think, okay, this is us and everyone out there is different and maybe not necessarily on our side. But he was trying to open us up to the idea that there's a lot of good people out there, not just the ones we arrest or have to fight or heaven forbid have to shoot. I would say the vast majority of people out there in the world like cops. They like veterans. They may not show it all the day, sometimes because they just don't know how, or they're a little bit embarrassed to, or they just don't have the opportunity. But when I did develop a lot of friends that weren't cops, and I tell them the stories, it was amazing. I think they saw us from a different perspective, that we're not just all big bad and want to beat the hell out of people, because nothing could be further from the truth. And I think TV shows like Cops have done a lot to uh, show the general public what police officers do on a daily basis and the stuff they go through. But that would be my main advice. Don't bring it home if you can't, but talk to somebody. And you usually can find somebody who's been there, done that. And if you have to, reach out. And I mean, don't have so much pride in yourself. It's like, I'm that tough guy. Uh, I, Several times in the book, I refer to a psychologist that we had on the department. I'm not sure if he's a psychiatrist or psychologist, but at any rate, when I was involved in the shooting, Department of Policy said we had to go see him. And I had a lot of things going on behind the scenes in my brain, and I was too tough to open up to him. But he saw it, and he said, "Sandy, are we good with this?" I'm talking about the shooting. "Yeah, I'm good with it." He said, "Is there anything else bothering you?" I'm like, "No, Doc, I'm good." He said, "Really? You, there's nothing." You could tell he was trying to get me to open up, but I was too much of a tough guy. I wouldn't do it. And looking back on it now, I wish I would have, because he could have probably helped me a lot. But he would always end it when we walked out he'd walk me out to the parking lot, and he'd say, "Here's my number. Here's my private number. You need me 24/7. Just make that call." I never did.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that happens a lot of times, even if it's just talking to a friend, the onus is on us to be able to uh, find the moment which is right to open up, to let some of that weight off. And a lot of times we have that hard exterior shell that we put on, and we keep it on all the time because there's always some type of, I guess, fear of judgment, fear of you can't control your emotions, because if you break down, and show your true emotions with something, um, there's a stigma associated with that I think society puts on that, you're a softer person, but in actuality, you're just a human being. You're just showing that side to you, and I'm not saying you have to be this emotional puddle of mush, but talking to the right people, to let some of that weight off, that burden that you hold onto when you deal with multiple, especially multiple incidents or multiple deployments, and you hold on to that burden, or it becomes a burden because you hold on to it for so long. It manifests into something that may not have, if you just shed some of that weight off here and there, and empty that glass. They talk about empty your glass, and that's an old saying, you know, and I think before you mentioned about, getting in contact with others within the community, where your friends, your circle of friends, isn't just the people in which you work with, because then you can truly become self-aware of your own life as well. Because if you have the same like-minded people, and you go through the same incidents, and that's the people you hang out with outside, those are the people that your inner circle is, your outer circle is. The same with the military, is all the time. It's eat, sleep, and breathe policing, or military or veteran stuff. And you're not able to kind of take a step back and see the world outside of what you have going on in that moment with your friends. And I think that was very, very well put, that you put out there. So now we got in contact because of Alan Chasen, and his experience as well. And I'm glad that we got in contact. How did you guys come about meeting, and your friendship and everything from there? What is it today? And bouncing knowledge off. You guys have a book. Him and Ed Ford wrote Postcards Through Hell. And I think it's awesome that you guys are putting down your stories for others to hear and sharing those. You guys plan on maybe coming up with something together as well, putting something together?
No, I haven't talked to him about that. I am writing a sequel to my book. I mean, it's just all the stories that my publisher actually made me take out stories. He said, this is just too many. This is because it was like over 400 pages. Amazon won't even print this. So I took some out, and there's some that I forgot all about. And as I'm going around talking to my buddies, and they said, man, I thought you would have put that story in about and I went, wow, I forgot all about that. So anyway, I'm compiling all these news stories, and so, but in terms of writing one with Alan, we have not discussed that, but I'd be happy to write something with Alan. But Alan was on a team that was in the area, and we were very fortunate in Houston to obviously get a lot of call ups and get a lot of really good training and go to places and learn from people and come back. And so the area teams would want to train with us, and we would share with them what we had learned from someone else. And Alan was one of those team members that I knew way back in the day, and we always just kind of stayed in touch. And then I kind of lost contact with him for a while. I was just busy with my training deal, and I didn't know where. Well, now I know he was going over across the big pond and do good things over there. And then I guess he got my book, and he called me and he said, "Man, I wrote a book too." And I'm like, "Really?" And so then he's telling me all about this career that I didn't even know he had. And he sent it to me, and I read it, and he asked me if I would write an introduction to it in the back, which I was honored to do. And but yeah, that's been kind of the extent of it. But Alan's a great guy, and I've known him and his guys for years.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Sandy, I appreciate you coming on, and we'll definitely have to do a follow up episode, and you can dive more in depth into your military or your policing career, and talk about that as well. Where can people be able to go and get your books and be able to dive into your insight and your stories?
Well, pretty much everywhere books are sold. I know Amazon has it. A lot of the other books places, I've even seen it in a couple of bookstores here locally. But there's a lot of books that have been written over the years called The Long Road Home. And I didn't quite answer your question about how I came up with that title. But about the second half of my career, I had moved out of Houston a ways because I was raising a family, and I didn't want to raise them in the inner city. I wanted them to have more of a country kind of aspect. So as a result, I was driving every day, and I was dealing with things that we had just had situation where maybe we just had to use deadly force, or one of my guys got hurt or whatever, and I'd have to deal with those memories on that long road home. And then, as I mentioned, at the end, there's a big twist, and so he gets to go that long road home with a whole different state of mind, and so that's how that came to be. But when I tell that story to let you know that if you just put the long road home, you may get a book from someone else. So you have to put by Sandy Wall, and then it'll come up. But it has an ebook. We don't have an audio book yet, but yeah, they can get it on pretty much any of those places.
Awesome. The long road home. Appreciate you coming on the show and spreading your knowledge and, putting your books out there with your stories and everything else. And we'll definitely do a follow-up. Hope you enjoy your day. This is Everlasting Veteran. I am your host, Ryan Landry. Thank you for tuning in. And remember to check out Sky Hunter Outfitters, which is the sponsor of Everlasting Veteran down in Idabel, Oklahoma, veteran owned and operated. Thank you.
When the smoke clears, we're still standing. Just to stand our ground.
You're listening to Everlasting Veteran.
When the smoke clears.